Thank you. My role tonight, I think, is to paint a picture of the Great Recession that we are still in. And so I want to tell you 5 reasons why this macroeconomic contraction is the worst we've had since the Great Depression. First is this is global in scope. We haven't really had a downturn since then that's been absolutely global, where there's no source of strength. The second is this thing started in the housing market, which means it hit households and consumption first. Ordinarily, business cycles hit businesses first, who get sensitive to the economic conditions, and they turn down employment and so forth. Housing hit consumption. Consumption in much of the developed world is about 2/3 of GDP. If you hit households first, and even if they cut only a small percentage of their spending, it's already 2/3 of GDP. Third, this thing hit banking, so that what we call external finance premia have moved up radically. It's hard to get a loan. No crisis in the post-World War II period in the United States has hit banking like this one did. So these 3 dimensions of the current downturn are already unique individually, and collectively we've seen nothing of the kind. That's 3. The fourth is most downturns since World War II in the United States were the result of the Federal Reserve letting inflation get out of control and then deliberately raising interest rates to fight inflation. And then when the Federal Reserve thought it had inflation under control, it had the power to bring interest rates back down and end the recession. So for most of the time, when we had recessions, the Federal Reserve was in charge of the recession, so to speak. One of the reasons it was able to do that is because interest rates were high. Some of you may know interest rates are high when inflation and inflation expectations are high. Well, this time we had very low inflation to start with and low inflation expectations. So the Federal Reserve, to be brief about this, was not really in charge of this recession. And now interest rates are 0. It can't get us out of this recession. So that's the 4th point. The 5th point is this recession had in the midst of it, one of the worst panics we've seen in all of the 20th century, and something akin to the 19th century style panic that occurred after the failure of Lehman Brothers and that miserable week in which the public in the United States was so afraid it drove the interest rate on 3-month Treasury bills to 0. It was willing to hold Treasury bills just as a safe investment at no return at all. We hadn't seen anything like that this century. Even a panic of that nature hadn't really occurred as part of the Great Depression. We'd had banking panics which weren't quite as severe. This was a worldwide thing. So these are 5 reasons why this particular Great Recession is the worst we've seen in so many decades. I want to talk a little about the G20. Why hasn't this thing morphed into the Great Depression? There's been a lot of discussion about that. I think one of the reasons is the existence of the G20, which is only around for 10 years or so, serves as a forum within which peer pressure can be exerted on all the leaders of the major countries of the world to fortify them, and I'm slowing down because this is such an important point, to fortify them against the temptation to keep jobs at home by putting tariffs up on imported goods. The reason we had, or one of the main reasons, everyone agrees we had the Great Depression in the 1930s was countries succumbed to the temptation to try to protect their own jobs by putting up tariffs against foreign imports. And of course that just resulted in retaliation around the world. Trade not only contracted, but it collapsed. Gave us a decade-long Great Depression and some other disastrous political economy results in Europe and so forth, and World War II eventually. The G20, in my opinion, has done a lot to make it embarrassing in this peer pressure sense to actually have your country go terribly protectionist. Now, a couple of weeks ago I was saying this, and somebody asked me, well, what can the G20 do in the future? And I said, keep doing it. And I don't think I was wrong. You see the papers yesterday, today, it's all about tire imports being imposed by the United States against China, and China potentially retaliating with chicken and whatnot. I won't go into the details. If you want to, we can take this up again in Q&A. But that's basically my main point. The reason we stayed out of the Great Depression, or one of the main reasons, is because we've so far, have not slid into a trade war with our major trading partners. Thank you.
Next, Gabrielle.